University. I was leading a group in the biomedical informatics department there, and a lot of the work that I've been doing has been coordinating large data sets, particularly in the realm of metabolomics and multi-omics.
Thank you. It's great having you. Aaron?
Aaron Arby. Nice to meet everyone. Director of Machine Learning and Data Science at Third Rock Ventures. I work both with our early stage company creation and ideation processes, mid-stage with the companies as we build them out internally. Then as we launch them, I'll often spin out and make sure the companies have everything they need in the context of data science, machine learning, and that they're able to really execute on their drug discovery strategies best they can.
Thank you, Aaron. So I guess we can start. Abhishek, do you would like to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, happy to. Again, it's a pleasure to have known each of you, and I'm glad to be part of this panel. I am the founder CEO of Elucidata, and before Elucidata, I was trained as a computational biologist, where I had the privilege of working at Agios Pharmaceuticals, which brought 2 first-in-class drugs to the market. And being part of that team really shaped the thesis that we wanted to execute and commercialize at Elucidata. So and a lot of that is aligned around FAIR guidelines that NIH has talked about a lot. So that's the theme that the company has settled on, and I'm very proud to be leading this team to make this happen with companies in partnership with them.
Okay, great. Thank you, Abhishek. So let's start our discussion, and the first question is really what it means to be fair, or what it means for organization like NCATS or a pharmaceutical company to be more fair than they are now, and what it means to you. So maybe we can start with Aaron and Evie. If you can tell us about inside your organization, what does that mean to be fair compared to what your state now, and how fair are you today compared to a few years ago, and what you see in the future?
I can start. So I'll start by saying, most of our companies are relatively, at least our early stage portfolio is exactly that, early stage. And so what's great about that is we have a blank slate for implementing, policies that increase the fairness of data, that at least have it more centralized, more accessible. So kind of get the right, bones in place that we can build upon. In terms of how fair are we for a lot of these companies, I'd say we are striving to be more fair. But the truth is that to actually create a fair ecosystem requires a relatively large investment in the software engineering, in the database normalization, and then in the APIs for everything to access it, and or however you want to think about accessing. And that actually exceeds what most of our companies can do. So what we find ourselves doing is we wind up picking and choosing how fair we make different processes depending on how often they get used and how complex the findability or accessibility is. So we wind up actually prioritizing those things that we think are going to be most relevant for our early stage drug discovery.
It really depends on the specific group, the specific project. It's not just something that you can do across those different companies and groups and projects. It's very specific to how much benefit you're going to get for each. Is that true?
So absolutely. We do have a few primitives that we share across projects. So we have an AWS ecosystem developed by Karina Chmielewski, our head of IT and platform operations. And that has kind of laid at least a common ground where everyone can interact with data. And then on top of that, we've recently built out some additional data science primitives around sharing buckets, around sharing other kinds of tools, and even code and notebooks for how things get done. So we do have those base primitives. But in terms of taking something like what I just described and kind of making it all the way to the extent that it's fully fair, that's a space that we do that in a much more specialized, focused manner for sure.
All right, thank you, Aaron. So, Ewe, maybe you can let us know a little bit what is happening at NCATS and within your group regarding to efforts towards FAIR, or how are you dealing with that issue?
Sure. I mean, I think it's always a high bar that we're continuously trying to strive for. And the way we look at it is in terms of the software, but also in terms of the data, so both. And so for every project, especially if there's some types of process or analytics process or something like that, then we always ask about generalizability and how would be able to be reused, how easy it is to hand off, transparency of their processes. And so the goal is to basically have it embedded as projects get conceived off the bat, so that there's this just overall mindset and basically stepwise goals, right, that need to be achieved for every project as it's being built, with it being quite difficult to do that retrospectively sometimes, right? If you have projects that have been started for a long time, and then to go back and make all aspects fair can be quite difficult. And so we're trying to work towards processes to be sure that moving forward we can keep trying to achieve this goal of having all the data and software fair.
So you're saying fair, but maybe if you can, what is actually the standards that sort of like would define, or the most critical ones that would actually make a software or data set fair in your mind?
Well, it has to be very well documented. So whether it's software or data, there has to be appropriate metadata that is associated, so that one would know what the state of the data is, or the software. I mean, for software, it's portability and how it can be used, if it's modular, if there's different modules that can be attached to it, making sure that the code is publicly available. All our code is on GitHub, for example, and we're putting in place some CD/CI development processes in place. And then for the data, it's making sure that a lot of the metadata is being appropriately captured, so that especially if it's process data, how was the data processed, how can it be used? And I think this reuse of data is very complicated, because there's many different ways a data set can be used, and oftentimes it just depends on the analysis. But to actually provide almost different views of the data, to be able to support different types of analyses, is something that I think we should definitely, and we're trying to strive for.
Thank you. That was a great answer, and it's a good segue to our next set of questions, which is why do we really need this fair? It's costly, it's time consuming. What is the benefit of it? And I guess we can go to John first to answer that.
So I think that's a really good question. The costly part of it, I look at it the other way. It's extremely costly not to be fair. If you look at the amount of lack of reproducibility in science today, especially even in R&D, industrialized R&D, the numbers are staggering. The repeat of experiments, the level of data wrangling that goes on in a large R&D organization can be as high as 80%. So if you take 150 people around the globe in a particular department and you add up that 80% data wrangling, that they're not doing science, you start to easily get into the multi-million-dollar range per department. So it's definitely not a cost that shouldn't be seriously looked at. And I think the benefits that you get is you're going to get reduced cycle times, and you're going to do better science. And it's been proven already in different areas. And in fact, if you do it, you actually get into this mode of in silico or model first type approaches in research, where now you're getting 40% efficiency gains in your discovery. So it's definitely something that should be done, and done as soon as possible.
So Abhishek, I see that you're nodding your head in agreement. Is there something that you would like to add?
No, yes, and I think John articulated really well. The real question is, like, what is the cost of not being fair, right? And there's an implicit assumption, a promise of, if data is fair, it would be, unleash or unlock the value of the data. But a what I would like to add to John's comment is that there's a cultural or educational component, if you will, to this too, right? And organizations need to be willing to understand that the cost of not being fair, because anecdotally, and I've seen this in my colleagues in now and in my previous life, they're very happy or they're very comfortable spending $1 million getting instruments, right? But taking care of the data that would come out of that instrument for months and years to come, that's almost always an afterthought. An investment to create the infrastructure or create hire personnel, qualified people to build the infrastructure, maintain the infrastructure to make sure that data is fair, is almost an afterthought. And that, I think, conversation also needs to change across stakeholders within an organization as well. And that has to become more front and center, right? A lot of the conversation has been dominated by ML, and I think there's a lot of paraphernalia around ML that needs to be in place to have a successful enterprise level ML play in any life sciences company. And that's often lost in the conversation that is dominating more mainstream platforms.
Yeah, I think this is also great for the continuation of our discussion, which is now like what are the challenges or what are the blocks of actually making it happen? So if you're in academia and then you move to, I guess, non-profit type of a little bit more, I guess, more something that is somewhere in between industry and academia at NCATS. So what are the different challenges that are happening in your organization to convince, I guess, the upper management to invest those dollars, or at your level, convincing the team that you are leading either in academia or in NCATS, as well as the actual developers, their motivation to do those things. So there are challenges at all those levels. Can you address those challenges?
Sure. I mean, I guess I'll start with getting the compliance, right, and getting the team kind of on board to doing it. It's interesting because everybody has their own style, right? So if we're talking about software development or even in data acquisition, everybody has their own style in how they may approach this and what they think may be fair. And I think having the coordination of, well, these are actually the minimal requirements, right? I mean, it's almost kind of standards. This is what must be in place. And then ideally, it would also need to be vetted or cross-checked by other members of the team. And to get everybody to kind of comply as this is the baseline and this is what is needed, that just takes a lot of persistence and kind of encouraging. And I think whether you're in an academic institution or you are in at NCAS, which I think you described it well in terms of the environment here, then I think that coordination is really what is needed, so that the baseline is established. And in terms of leadership, that's really hard because it's hard to quantitate the value of actually following the FAIR guidelines, whether again it's for software or data. And one way to potentially quantitate is to look at show examples of data reuse or code reuse and say, this took this amount of time to get to this point with this software, and now we were able to reuse parts of the code, and rather than 1 year, we were able to get it done in 3 months because we just had to tweak this, right? And actually tracking this is pretty difficult, and because there's a lot of moving parts. It depends on the person working on it and et cetera. But I think if there's a way to quantitate it and to show that we're actually reducing the amount of time, and in essence, we're also reducing the amount of dollars, then this could help as an argument to leadership. But it's very hard to see this effort as something tangible because right now it's something almost I wouldn't say fully theoretical, because I think all of us here on this panel agree to the value of it, right? But to actually quantitate that value, I think is still quite challenging, and maybe a time metric would be helpful there.
Yeah, I think that also touches with what Aaron says, that you really have to see whether the investment is really justified, because you can go in circles and work really hard to do something that is pretty useless and potentially boring. But I think I think there are other challenges that maybe Aaron, can you elaborate on the challenges that you're facing implementing some of those things? Because I'm sure that, like you said, there is a baseline of things that you can potentially enforce, but there's some things that are just not done. And what could be the reasons for those, and how do you combat them in your organization?
So we're also lucky, I think, where since since a lot of our companies, the time at least when I focus on our companies the most is in early stage, so we have that opportunity to kind of build with those primitives in mind of being able to persist the data, be able to persist the analyses that get done, then making sure we surface those to not just the data science team, but surface all the data, all the analysis to the scientific teams, to the drug discovery teams, to the clinical teams. I think that the challenges we face in doing that are, I think the main one is picking out exactly what we want to do and narrowing down and focusing to kind of the most manageable tasks. So, FAIR stands for what? Findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Is that right? Just as a quick confirmation to this panel? Yeah? Okay. Just want to double check. So, so one of the things that we think a lot about is how reusable data needs to be. And at some of our companies, data reusability, and for some of the assays we do, is really mission critical. As Abhishek was saying, if you're paying $1 million for a machine, and then all the data that comes off it is really a one-time use, and then you throw it away, that's a travesty. And so we would want to make sure that that kind of data was stored with proper metadata, et cetera. But when it comes down to interoperability, for instance, that's a place where we found that a lot of times data needs to be munged and remunged in order for it to be interoperable in a new way. And so if we were, for instance, interested in, let's say for example, something like an EQTL analysis, that might be done one way if we want to think about EQTLs in the context of something like RNA-seq, where EQTLs stand for expression of quantitative trait loci, which is where you are looking for regulatory elements that are where the genetic modification or genetic polymorphisms in those regulatory elements would then correlate with the expression of the gene. If we're looking to have interoperability between EQTLs and RNA-seq data from perhaps a new set of samples, we might do a very different set of mungings than if we were interested in doing the epigenetic analysis of the same EQTLs and those regulatory elements. And so it's the interoperability where probably we spend the, in some ways, the least amount of time making our data truly fair. In contrast, we actually spend an enormous amount of time on another I, which would be interactivity of the data and make sure that gets surfaced. So that kind of is a brief overview on some of how we think about prioritizing different aspects of fairness in early stage and even our later stage companies.
Maybe can I comment on this then a little bit too?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I think I take a much harder line on this, and I liken it to we're on a journey, right? And we have to start somewhere, but without a proper strategy, scientific data and process strategy in place, it's always going to be uncertainty on how to proceed from a FAIR perspective. And until you put that foundational way of working in, where you bring in from the time of data capture all the way through to reporting, which you also include how a company buys instrumentation, buys software, what has to be there to do all that, you will always get this churn, and things will not be aligned, and you will not end up in a FAIR data and process world. And I actually think it takes, as he was saying, strong leadership. You actually have to tie this from a change management perspective, within your organization, you have to have stakeholder alignment. You actually have to have your objectives aligned, and people are bonused and paid accordingly to make this all work. And if you just look in history over time when things like this have happened, one example would be, the automobile, roads, traffic lights, etc. In the very beginning, we didn't have a lot of the rules in place, and there were a lot of, it was a lot of disorder, a lot of entropy. But over time, as things came along and we got all those rules, we got ways of working, things started to work out. And the same thing is true in the finance industry, etc. So I think we have to start being a little more diligent about what we're doing and how we're doing it and what we expect to get out of it. And it's going to come with a very foundational approach, but also strong leadership and governance to make it work.
So can you comment also about how it relates to AI and machine learning and knowledge imputation and predictions?
Absolutely. So today we are so far behind. So I was doing machine learning back in 1999 and 2000, and I knew then we had what I called a model quality data issue. Like, we didn't have enough high quality data to get the most out of our models. And 20 years later, we're still in this situation. And in fact, AI and machine learning are more hype than they are reality today in our world, because our data environments are suffering and they cannot feed the machines the machine learning like we need it to today. If things were different, we would be much further ahead in a lot of things. I actually think we would get through something like COVID 50% faster if we would have had these high quality data environments 10, 15 years ago. So without that high quality, or what I call model quality data, you're not going to have the energy to run the machines. And that's why we need to buckle down, change our culture in research and development, and make this happen sooner than later.
Abhishek, would you like to add something to that point?
Yeah, recently I was pointed to a resource at Stanford, Dawn. There's a group made of computer scientists and others, and they have a lot of case studies. And one of the points that they make is only very rich enterprises have been able to successfully implement AI projects at a company-wide level, like Google, for example. And a lot of smaller companies have struggled with doing that at an enterprise level. And again, they made the case, and that resonated quite strongly with me, that the conversation again is so much around that piece of ML code or AI model, that the entire infrastructure that is needed to make sure that that succeeds is lost. And they are very specialized tasks that perhaps one single company can focus on just a piece of it to make that happen, right? So the infrastructure that you need to have a successful ML enterprise level play is missing. That's not part of the conversation. That's not part of the hiring plans. That's not part of how people think about it, and that should change, right? And FAIR, I think, is a part of that component that would create that infrastructure for any successful ML project within a life sciences company.
Thank you. I think we covered a lot of ground. Maybe each person can have some final comments to conclude. So Evie would like to start with some final thoughts.
Sure. I mean, I think all of these discussions kind of point to, I think, a lot of coordination, and I think there are also a lot of analogies that can be made with other fields, right? So if you're a chemist, for example, or something like that, well, you want to check purity, right? And then there's certain quality controls that are put in place that just have to be there in order for you to continue doing the experiment and do synthesis or whatever you may do. And I feel like it's really the same here. And somehow these fields, I think, kind of have established that, yes, there has to be this baseline quality, and here it needs to be established in in the data through, I guess, these FAIR guidelines. And I think there's also quite an emphasis to be made in terms of the processes and how do we best get there, and sharing basically these processes across the board to help unify ourselves a little bit and make sure that we have strong arguments, for leadership that we can actually get some of these aspects funded to be able to create, adequately fair data and software.
Thank you. I guess, Aaron, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah. I think that the democratization of machine learning and democratization of not just machine learning, but software engineering as a whole. Since software engineering, 15, 20 years ago, C++, Java, these were languages that were more challenging to work in, either for data scientists or non-data scientists. So the democratization not just of software engineering, of machine learning, of whatever AI is today, those are all kind of really significant trends. And I think that what's really interesting about FAIR is, and kind of the whole concept of FAIR, is that 15 years ago it wouldn't have mattered since you didn't have that democratization. So in order to even think about doing any sort of value extraction from the data, larger data sets, you really need to be an expert. And nowadays that's just not the case. And so I think that the most powerful thing that I take away, at least from those opportunities that we do make fully fair at our Third Rock portfolio companies, is that it's not just the experts anymore that are benefiting from it. It really is the entire organization. And the more accessible the data is, and the more findable and the more interoperable as best it can be and reusable and everything else, the more fair your data is, the more the entire team can feel engaged in the data science process. And the more engaged people feel and the greater stakes they put into the data that they're generating and interpreting, the better all of our science is, and the more productive we all are as a team.
Great. Thank you for those comments. John, would you like to say some last?
Yeah, I feel that, I've like I said, I've worked in large pharma for many years in a multitude of roles, and the human heroes that we have in drug discovery and therapy discovery today, they need help, but they also have to realize that there's a culture change that needs to happen in R&D, and that is data is an asset, process is an asset, and that what you're, just like what Aaron just said, what you're doing is for the better good of the company, not necessarily just your project or experiments, etc. And that to get to this point where you're producing model quality data, you have reproducibility in mind when you're doing your experimentation. All this is critical to drive the needle forward and to get the most out of your data. And I think FAIR is just one aspect of it, but it's the culture change that has to happen in R&D. And transformation means everyone must change, from the CEO all the way down to the brand new hire. And to get that data as an asset mentality is just critical for us to focus on the much harder problems that are in front of us. At the end of the day, we don't know anything about biology. There's so much to be discovered and learned, and we'll get there faster if we can implement some of these FAIR principles and do a much better job.
Yeah, I agree with you. With this transformation, we see that also in academia, and it just takes time. So if you think about 10 years ago, people were dismissing a lot of those methods. Now people are paying attention and realizing that it's happening. So it's just like a slow revolution. It doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
Abhishek, final words. Thank you for hosting this meeting today. I thought it was very productive. But maybe you can say a few words to summarize and conclude.
Yeah, happy to. Thanks for again participating and taking time out from your schedule. For me, like I've not been around for long, but like this clearly these are very exciting times. Just anecdotally, I've seen how my colleagues have changed or evolved, in the last 10 years, if you will, in industry at least. The language has been co-opted by senior leadership, like Novartis CEO, he writes and is very articulate about the need of just investing in the data or the infrastructure that we have touched upon, right? So very exciting times, but I think to a great extent the onus lies also on folks like on this panel and the community at large, right? Like Evie was talking about, how do we translate the value, the implicit promise of FAIR in quantitative measures to the senior leadership so that they're more willing, or they feel that they're losing out by not investing in this. And that has not quite happened, to be fair, right? And so I think it's still very much a work in progress, but clearly very exciting times. This is a pretty fun time to be doing what I'm lucky to be doing what I'm doing. So again, thanks for taking time out, and another good fun discussion.
Good. I guess we can conclude. Thank you, Abhishek, for always